Yeah, we want to bring on a guest who's written a great book for baseball fans, particularly if you grew up in the New York area and Brooklyn. It's called Our Bums, the Brooklyn Dodgers in History, Memory, and Popular Culture. We're going to talk some vintage Dodger baseball with the author of the book, David Krell. He's based up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and he joined us on the telephone right now. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to have a chance to talk with you. I had an opportunity to read through the book. Now, I was born in Brooklyn, but I lived on Long Island, so I don't know a lot about it. But my parents lived in Brooklyn, and they went to many a game at Ebbets Field. So I heard a lot of stories about the storied Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the book is lore and legend and stories passed down from one generation to another. There's a chapter in the book that's totally personal interviews that I conducted. And I did that because, as you're pointing out, it was such a personal connection to this team that existed. So I felt that rather than do it totally by research through archival documents and letters and museums and stuff like that, that to get to the people who are there or if they passed on, their sons and daughters. And that's really what came through to me, the absolute loyalty that still exists 50, 60 years after they're gone.
No question about it, David. And I think another thing, and I'm fortunate enough too, my family all came from Brooklyn Heights before we got into New Jersey. And so my grandfather and grandmother and father and mother were very, very solid Brooklyn Dodger fans. And you don't sound like you're quite old enough to go from Ebbets Field to Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City when Roy Campanella used to bring his boat over and dock there at Jersey City and then come up and play the game.
No, not quite. I was born in '57, but my purpose in writing the book was to capture that aura as close as I could without getting into a time machine. And the people, as I say, who helped me with those interviews really shed a lot of light on what it was like to grow up in Brooklyn, to be a Dodgers fan, and going through the Jackie Robinson papers at the Library of Congress and the Branch Rickey papers at the Library of Congress, spending 3 or 4 days in Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame. You know, these people are really the guardians of history at the Library of Congress, at the Hall of Fame, and many other places. And you know, to really bring this story to life was a privilege.
Doug?
You talk about a team and a community, the borough of Brooklyn, so much intertwined from reading your book and just hearing stories about Ebbets Field, which was a bandbox of a stadium. The fans were right on top of the players, and they really got to know each other on a real personal level, didn't they? I think just walking around Brooklyn, the players knew the different people, knew the restaurants, knew the stores, so it was a whole different kind of atmosphere. Huh?
That's exactly right. You could go to the pediatrician's office and see Pee Wee Reese's wife with her son. You could go to the supermarket and see Mrs. Gil Hodges. They lived in the neighborhood. They were not in fancy mansions and driving fancy cars. They lived in the neighborhood with the people. A couple players, I think, actually had, they have 2 family houses in Brooklyn. So players would take the top level, the top apartment, for lack of a better word. That would never happen today. Absolutely never. It happens in the minor leagues sometimes, but not in the major leagues. So these people were not merely heroes. They were true blue Brooklynites, no matter where they came from. Pee Wee Reese came from Louisville, and Jackie Robinson came from Pasadena. But once they played at Ebbets Field, they were Brooklynites.
Well, I have a grandson that still lives in Brooklyn and starting a business there, and so I still have a little bit of a connection with Brooklyn from way back, as I indicated. And they used to carpool. I don't know if you remember what the book has to say about that. But Ferrello and Snyder and that group used to carpool to Ebbets Field or take the bus.
There's a story that I found. Somebody told it to me, a fellow named Marty Adler, who unfortunately has passed. And Marty was the biggest Brooklyn Dodger fan you ever met. And he told me a story. I found the same story in the television show Brooklyn Bridge, which was created by Gary David Goldberg, who created Family Ties.
Oh, sure. I remember that show, yeah. Go ahead.
Marty told me the story that a bunch of Dodger players were driving in a convertible, and his friends shouted, "There are 422 RBIs in that car." And the same thing happened in an episode of Brooklyn Bridge, which, as you know, had the Brooklyn Dodgers as a backdrop. It's his family growing up in Brooklyn, and Goldberg patterned it after his family. The two boys were patterned after Gary David Goldberg and his brother, Stan, who's also interviewed in the book. And to have that kind of knowledge, to have that kind of loyalty, to know how many RBIs are in the car, just tallying them up in your head really quickly, and knowing how many Duke Snyder had, and how many Reese had, and how many Hodges had. That's just incredible. And that kind of thing is lost today, I think. People are involved in fantasy baseball and in the fantasy draft and all of this stuff. And I think something gets lost in the purity of the game and the dedication to learning it and embracing your team. I think that's something that's, if it's not lost, it's definitely faded.
Well, I go back a little bit further than you do, obviously, and when I first started listening to the Dodgers, probably was in 1943, 1944. Right. And, you had Goody Rosen playing center field. Not many people would remember who Goody Rosen was. Right. Of course, Dixie Walker, who was involved in one of the biggest trades with Pittsburgh, when Branch Rickey, they emphasized that in the movie a couple of times. Maybe the poorest trade was when Andy Pafko came, and they expected a lot more from the Chicago, what they thought was the Chicago Slugger at that time. But it was an amazing team, and you go back to 1941 when they won the pennant, and Hugh Casey threw that spitball, and Mickey Owens missed it. And so I there are more stories of the Dodgers, but the last story I'll tell you before you jump in is that it was the last team I ever rooted for in my life. I've worked in the business all my life. When the Dodgers left in 1957, I've never rooted for a team since then.
You would be surprised, Don, how many people told me that story. Once they were gone, I stopped following. Once they left, I stopped following. Or again, if they passed, their kids would say, my father just lost interest in baseball after 1957. Kind of watched the Mets here and there, but not a fan like he used to be. It's funny you mentioned Andy Pafko. I have two baseballs sitting on my desk, right as I'm looking at them. One is signed by Bobby Thompson and Ralph Branca, and one is signed by Andy Pafko. The Thompson-Branca ball reminds me that, some days you're going to win and some days you're going to lose. And the Pafko ball reminds me some days there's nothing you can do about it, because the iconic photograph is of Pafko at the wall. When Thompson's home run sails, it's almost a line drive, and it sails over the left field wall very, very quickly. Doesn't hang in the air or anything. And Pafko just has this look of helplessness about him. So those are two reminders for me that are very tangible, and I see them every day, and they're sitting about a foot and a half to my right as I'm talking to you guys.
Doug?
Talking with David Krell. The name of the book is Our Bums, about the Brooklyn Dodgers, and you just mentioned one of the great moments in baseball history. Not so great if you were a Dodger fan, but for something that happened 64 years ago, people still know it today, even if you weren't around at that time. It's just one of those moments. Bobby Thompson's shot. You have a great picture in the book of Ralph Branca after the game in the locker room, and that'll go down in infamy. There's been other great home runs since then, but I think that's the one that people remember, even if you weren't alive then.
Oh, sure. I mean, you have Kirk Gibson's home run in the '88 series, where he's kind of hobbling around the bases, and you have certainly other great moments. Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs in one game, all on the first pitch in the '77 series. But the Branca-Thompson thing is just out of this world. I mean, it's iconic. It could possibly be the biggest moment ever in sports. It's sad that Ralph Branca got all that stress put on him, because a game is long and a season is long. And that series, the 2 out of 3 series at the end of the year, was long. And we know now the Giants cheated. They had a telescope, and cheating is part of baseball. They were stealing signs in the 20s. It wasn't like this just happened. But I had the privilege of talking with Carl Erskine, and this story is not exclusive to me. It's been mentioned other places, but I think it bears repeating now. He said, I didn't have a Hall of Fame career, but I had a lot of Hall of Fame days. And he told me that he was in the bullpen in that third game in the 51 playoff. And when things started to get a little scary, for Brooklyn. Charlie Dressen, the manager, called up the bullpen and said, well, who's up? And Clyde Suforth, who's the bullpen coach, at that time looks at Erskine, looks at Branca, and at that precise moment, Erskine bounced a curve in the dirt. And Suforth says, well, it looked pretty good, but Erskine just bounced the curve. Get me Branca. If he had picked Erskine, it could be a totally different story. And it's just one of those great moments. But what it shows you is that the Brooklyn Dodgers never lost the loyalty of the fans. And people forget, Don and Doug, that the Dodgers lost to the Phillies on the last day of the 1950 season. They lose again on the last day of the 1951 season. They lose to the Yankees in the 52 series, lose to the Yankees again in the 53 series. 54, the Giants go to the series to represent the National League. It wasn't until 55 that they actually won, and it was their only World Series victory while the team was in Brooklyn.
Well, I can still see Richie Ashburn, putt-putt, who played for the Phillies for so many years. He made that throw, and the indecision by the third base coach he threw. I think he threw out shotgun Schuber, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not positive about that, but I think that's who he threw out at the plate. And there was no reason he should have sent him. And he did send him, and of course that was the last play, as you said, in 1950, and then the Phillies went on to lose 4 straight in the World Series, but unfortunately, that Kurt Simmons taken away because of the Army, so they only had Robin Roberts, and Kurt Simmons was taken away, and so they were really shorthanded.
Yeah, and you mentioned George Schuber. He's one of these overlooked figures in Brooklyn Dodgers lore, and certainly in baseball history. Jackie Robinson played his first professional baseball game in Jersey City, April 18th, 1946. He's playing for the Montreal Royals, the AAA farm team for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He comes up to the Dodgers in 47. But when he plays for Montreal against the Jersey City Giants, he crossed the plate to score, and George Schuber shook his hand. It's an iconic photograph, and it really opened the door for racial tolerance. We saw in the movie 42, and it's been written about so many times, the Pee Wee Reese gesture. And there's a statue at MCU Park where the Brooklyn Cyclones play, of Reese with his arm around Robinson. And it happened all across the National League. It didn't just happen in Cincinnati like some people have written or like it's depicted in the movie. But Schuber deserves equal credit. I think because it wasn't on as big a stage, that's why we don't really hear too much about it. But it was still a pretty big moment for a white man to shake a black man's hand at the plate. And it was Jackie Robinson, who everybody knew by that point was the first black player in organized baseball and would soon be the first black player in Major League Baseball.
Well, Doug, a lot of people don't remember, but I'll tell you one thing about Krell Erskine. Also, Krell was a great person. He had a handicapped child, and boy, I'll tell you, he's done more in that field than he ever did playing baseball. But he had the best changeup, maybe, of anyone in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Carl Erskine's changeup was maybe Johnny Padres when he came up a little bit later on. Duplicated it, but those two pitchers were really the forefronters of the changeup.
Yeah, Erskine, not only a competitor, but a true gentleman, an absolute gentleman, successful businessman, has spent a lot of money for charities in his home state in Indiana. He's just got this Midwestern way about him, just a genteel way. And when I called him to introduce myself, he just couldn't do enough. He was so pleasant to deal with, and it was a privilege, really, to just sit and listen to him talk on the phone about these stories and about what it was like to be a Brooklyn Dodger. And one thing that came through, and it came through in a lot of the interviews, actually, there's an HBO miniseries, I shouldn't say miniseries, a 2-part documentary called The Ghosts of Flatbush. And he is featured in that documentary quite largely. And he said, if you weren't there, it's kind of hard to describe it. And I got that sentiment a lot from people with whom I talked. There was something about that team. There was something about Erskine, or as the Brooklynites would call him, Oist. There was something about Pee Wee Reese, something about Preacher Rose, something about Billy Cox, something about Roy Campanella. There was something about all of these players. They were so colorful. And I defy anybody to find me any books about the 1950s Yankees, because I have looked high and low, east and west, north and south. I've looked in every nook and cranny, in every bookstore you can imagine, online, in Cooperstown, at the Hall of Fame, on Amazon. There just aren't any books about the 1950s Yankees and what they represented. And I have a whole bookcase full of Brooklyn Dodgers books. There is something unique and mystical about that team that still exists today. And it really is mythical. It's been a long day, I'm sorry. But there's something mythical about that team that we have these emotions. And you mentioned the 51 Ralph Branca tossing the pitch to Bobby Thompson. There are men in their 80s who are still not over that game. They have to walk out of the room. They have to walk out of the room if it's playing on ESPN or ESPN Classic or some news story. They just cannot deal with it.
I'll tell you, you talk about Dodger fans and talk about the symphony and all that type of thing, but
yes,
if you remember, or you're probably in the book, I apologize that I haven't had a chance to read the book.
No,
but,
it's okay.
One of the lasting memories for me, every time I think of Sweet Caroline and they're singing up there at Fenway Park and all the candles, it was Pee Wee Reese, that Ebbets Field. Everybody that came in the last time when they saluted Pee Wee Reese, and they all lit the candles. I think it was in the South. I won't swear it was the seventh inning, but I think it was the seventh inning, and that was very close. It wasn't the last day of the season, but it was very close to it. And if you were there, you never forget it.
Yeah, there was something special about it. Hilda Chester with her cowbell. Hilda Chester was not an attractive woman, but she had a voice that could, carry well across Bedford Avenue.
Right.
And she would be there with her cowbell leading the charge. The symphony band that you mentioned. There was a music appreciation night where people brought in instruments, and there were like thousands of people. There was we don't have time to get into it now, but it was something about the source of it was a union issue. That the symphony band, for the listeners who don't know, there were these characters, and they would play songs like Three Blind Mice if the umpire got a call wrong, and things of that nature. You do that today. If an organist did that today, or the person in charge of the music did that today, they're gone. It's happened at minor league games.
Right.
Where somebody played Three Blind Mice and the umpire ejected.
And also Gladys Gooding is one of the great trivia questions of all time.
Who played for the Rangers, the Knicks, and the Dodgers.
Right.
I went to school.
You learned that.
So I went to school with the son of one of the guys in the symphony band, Soriano. You have his name in the book, Lou Soriano.
Oh, absolutely.
His brother's son. So I guess his uncle was in it, but his father was also in it. Adriano, I think, is his father's name. But I remember he showed me as a kid. I just brought back memories reading the book. When I went to his house, he showed me some of the symphony pictures and the memorabilia. So that was great stuff.
Yeah.
They were a part of the lore of Dodger of Ebbets Field. I'll tell you that they were.
Oh, absolutely. And no other team had that. No other team had this kind of storytelling and lore and legend and fact and history and the richness that ran through all of them. We don't talk this way about teams that are no longer in their original cities. We don't talk this way about the Boston Braves. Right. We don't talk this way about the Philadelphia Athletics. We don't talk this way about the Kansas City Athletics. There was something about Brooklyn that took these disparate neighborhoods, made them into a city. Then they were later a borough, and then focused on this team that really was just a part of the fabric, just like your school, just like your church, just like your synagogue, just like your neighborhood. It was a representation to the world that Brooklyn was just as much a metropolitan force as Chicago or Boston.
Right.
Excuse me, or St. Louis.
And they were also part of the lore of the Second World War. I mean, one of the things of the Second World War, if you want a life raft somewhere, the Brooklyn Dodgers were the question they always asked somebody to see if they were
That's right.
German or if they were a Frenchman or what they were. And
That's right.
And that
Absolutely.
that was one of the great lines in all the movies for so many years. And but the one thing I was really disappointed in, I know that you saw the second Jackie Robinson story.
Yeah.
For most people that are listening right now, there were two Jackie Robinson stories. One that he he starred in himself, but in the second one, one of the great players that I followed for so many years was Gene Hermansky.
Right.
Gene Hermansky, of all the Dodgers, Snyder, Reese, Robinson, Ferrillo, anybody, they featured Hermansky in the second movie, and they had him in it right-handed. I mean,
yeah,
unbelievable. How can you make that kind of a mistake?
That happens. I don't know why that happens. There are other things that happen for storytelling purposes because you have to, take a composite of characters, take a composite of experiences. Something like that is very easily researched. You can very easily research it. What I had a problem with, Don, is this. At the end of the movie, Jackie Robinson hits the home run.
Right.
The climax of the movie. But the way the movie portrays him, he's standing in the batter's box like Barry Bonds, watching the ball go over the fence. Jackie Robinson would never, ever, and to my knowledge, never did it.
No.
Never stood and showed up a pitcher. If he wanted to show up a pitcher, he did it on the base paths. If he hit the home run, if the ball went into fair territory, that was enough for him. He didn't argue to the extent that, it became a showboating type of thing. And he wasn't a showboat. He was just a fierce competitor, and people forget that.
Right.
Because, he was a hero and all of this. It's kind of the same way we think about George Washington. Well, he was a general, and then he was president. Well, he was a general, but before he was a general, he was a colonel, lieutenant, captain, whatever, and he was a strategist. Jackie Robinson was a strategist on the ball field. He was a competitor, but I don't believe that he had ever shown up a pitcher. And for the movie to take something that was already dramatic and to over-dramatize it, I just thought did a disservice to the man and to the team because it wasn't what he was about. He just wanted to do his job. He just wanted to play. Let me play. Let me do my job. And he did. He won Rookie of the Year in 1947, .311 lifetime batting average. There was no question he belongs in Cooperstown. But to over-dramatize it, I thought did him a disservice.
Well, I just couldn't understand how they could possibly. I mean, I was a Gene Hermansky fan. In fact, one day at Evans Field, he hit 3 home runs in a game. And I can remember vividly right now, if I'm sitting in this chair right now, I can tell you the day Joe Adcock hit 4 home runs.
Yeah.
Roy Campbell was the final batter in the bottom of the 9th inning. The Dodgers had the chance to tie it. I can't remember the score, but it was a high-scoring game. It was like 12-10 or something like that. And
right.
I can't remember the exact score, but the last batter was Roy Campanella, and Roy Campanella was called out with a couple people on base on a check swing, and I'll never forget that as long as I live. The Dodgers almost had a chance of coming back and winning a game where Joe Adcock hit 4 home runs in the game, and of course the other one was Gil Hodges when he hit the 4.
Yeah, and it's only been done, in the major leagues a handful of times.
Right.
But if you were going to pick anybody on the Dodgers to do it, it would have been Gil Hodges.
Well, David, I know we kept you longer than we said. We could do a whole hour on this. Hopefully we can get you back on down the road. But it's a great book of baseball history called Our Bums, the Brooklyn Dodgers in History, Memory, and Popular Culture. And David Krell has been our guest. And
thank you.